Are you a podcaster? Maybe you've got that big idea and you're looking for a network to join. The multi-award-winning Ozcast Network can get your content to eyes and ears all over the world. Join now for the first month free, and you could be featuring this sound at the beginning of your podcast.
Ozcast.
Simply head to ozcastnetwork.com for details.
Ozcast.
Yes, great to have your company for this special feature on Greats with Garby as we provide some insight for you on a monumental couple of weeks in Australian football. The awarding, of course, of the 2023 Women's World Cup to Australia and New Zealand. How good is that? And the new broadcast deal and winter trial for the A-League, which is a seismic moment for the game with so many elements to break down, which we will do for you here. My guests are waiting to join me. Before I bring them in, though, a thank you to our valued sponsors, ISC Sport, the choice for high-performance kit, and Buy East Buyers Agency. If you're looking to invest or buy a property in Australia's most lucrative market, contact Dave and Ronan from Buy East. They'll manage the whole process for you and give you a discount as well off their fee as long as you mention that Garby sent you. That's Buy East Buyers Agency. They are the best in the business, as are these three. Joining me to break down for you an enormous couple of weeks in Australian football are Vince Regari, football writer for the Sydney Morning Herald, who has been all over these stories, Samantha Lewis, one of the foremost women's football writers in the country, and Murray Shaw, who for close to 15 years ran Fox Sports' football department as executive producer. So his insight on so many of these subjects will be fascinating indeed. Hello to you all. Thanks so much for joining me. Great to have your company, Murray, Vincenzo and Samantha.
Thanks, Garby. Great to be considered a great.
Yeah, that didn't take long. Awesome. What is this, like first 5 episodes and we're in? You beauty.
You're in. That's what we'll do on this podcast. And I have just held off on mentioning Liverpool's title win, which was obviously a big moment as well in Australian football, considering the amount of supporters here. And that includes Samantha Lewis, which was great to learn a moment ago before we recorded.
Yeah, boys. Yeah, boys.
I know Murray and
Great chat, guys. See you later. All the best. Yeah, it was really nice.
I'm surprised we're not talking about that for the whole hour, Garby.
We might slot it in just as we go along to irritate you even more, Muzz and Vincenzo. But thrilled the Liverpool fans who are no doubt listening.
Congratulations to you. An incredible performance.
Thank you very much. Congratulations, though, to Australian football, because that was an awesome moment on Thursday night, and then we woke up for the double when Liverpool won the title. But Thursday night was incredible for the game. To get over the line for a senior World Cup, I don't think is something we would have ever envisaged, especially when you consider what happened with the bid for 2022 and the Men's World Cup. So Samantha, I'll go to you first as someone who has been so deeply invested in the women's game and dedicated so much, which is quite often a thankless task. The emotion of winning the bid, firstly. What did it mean to you, and why is it such a big deal?
I mean, I think I probably experienced every emotion that has ever existed in the 48 hours leading up to the announcement. I'm pretty sure, I went through the 7 stages of grieving at some point as well. I mean, I went through, in the moment where Gianni announced that we'd won, I went through a really serious amount of energy in the space of a couple of seconds. But I think the overwhelming emotion for me was relief. It was relief that FIFA came through and that we didn't have a repeat 2010. It was relief that the hard work of so many people on the bid team and so many people in Australian football generally had been recognised and rewarded for everything that they'd done. And honestly, relief for our industry and relief for the game, because football in Australia is in a pretty difficult spot. And this kind of event, I think, is one of those extremely rare opportunities for us to be able to get back on course with a kind of optimism that we haven't really had in quite a while. And that extends to football media as well. You know, we've lost quite a few voices in the past couple of weeks. So I think having a tournament like this to inject a lot of interest and energy back into the game will matter for a huge number of people.
Yeah, I think rays of positivity are very rare in Australian football at the moment, Garby. And some days you dread flicking through Twitter just to watch all the criticism of the game and everyone with their hot takes on where it should go. But how good was flicking through Twitter on Friday with the positivity around the game, and the fact that everyone was looking forward to a bright future for Australian football. I think that positivity probably lasted about 24 hours until we went back into what we know over the weekend. But, just the feel-good factor for Australian football. I mean, imagine being the new commercial director, for example, for the FFA, who was wondering how he was going to sell, naming rights for the A-League or a sponsor for the Socceroos, given everything that's happening at the moment. All of a sudden, the boost that he has to be able to go into corporates and go into boardrooms across Australia now and go, well, let's start talking about the fact that we've got the 2023 World Cup. I mean, all of a sudden, there's now dollars associated with the game, and hopefully more dollars that can come into the game thanks to that announcement.
Yeah, Buzz, you could see it on Friday morning at the Rocks in the press conference there. I mean, I've been to Matilda's opportunities where I've been the only person there, or I'm sure Sam's felt that a million more times than I have at W League games and whatnot. Women's football, it's been getting cool over the last few years, so to speak, but it's never felt more cool than it did on Friday morning. Every network was there. Every outlet you can imagine was there. Everyone wants a slice of this story. And that's going to be the way it is for the next few years. Everyone wants to know what the Matildas are doing because there's a World Cup coming up. And it's massive. And I'm happiest most of all for people like Sam and for like Anne Odong, who got some love on Twitter last night. These are the people who've been putting in the hard yards before all us bandwagoners jumped on board to get involved with the Matildas and women's football. And it's their hard work that got the ball rolling to get it to where it is today. So there's so many positives to come out of it.
Yeah, one of the things that I loved about that press conference, Vince, was as we were all standing around listening to premiers and senators and everything, we had a bunch of people who were jogging past on their morning runs shouting out to us, "Go Matildas." This is something that is starting to really bleed out into the public. And women's football, I think, is now at a really crucial moment, particularly off the back of COVID, which was a really serious threat to the momentum that the game had been generating recently. This is the kind of thing that is able to galvanise not just the community who's been part of football, but people outside of it as well. And that's what's, I think, so exciting about it.
The women's sports market is, the growing market in world sport. It's definitely the burgeoning one, and football is still the biggest game in the world in that sphere as well. This is an enormous opportunity, isn't it? And let's be honest, it is competitive in terms of attracting athletes in women's sport now as well. When you look at AFLW and the money and the resources that are being put into that part of the industry from other codes as well. How big do you think this will be in terms of keeping Australian football at the forefront of that competitive industry and attracting more footballers and taking the game to another level where, you know what, we are number one in that part of the industry in the sport of football? Vince?
Oh, mate, it's massive. I think the sponsors aspect is huge. I mean, we've lost a lot over the last few years. We're now going to have people knocking down the door. We'll probably have our choice of sponsors now as a game, people who want to associate. Media coverage automatically, like I said before, everything the Matildas do over the next 3 years is big. We've got an Olympics next year, an Asian Cup after that. I mean, those are now tournaments where we have to have football reporters there because it all feeds into the big feast in 3 years' time. It's massive. People are talking about football. People are going to be talking about the W League and which players are coming through and who might be getting into that squad in a few years' time. And obviously the flow-on effects are going to actually go on to men's football as well, I think, because it's a big halo effect, gets the game sort of at the front of everyone's mind again. And as I wrote over the weekend, it's hugely ironic that for years women's football has been told no one cares, you're leeching off the money brought in by the men, you should pay your own way, you should earn your own money to get through the game. Well, all those decisions by all those people over the years to actually put money into the women's game are paying off now because it is the women's game that is going to be the bonanza that saves everyone ultimately, and it's just so good. It's financially, conversationally, everything like that. Football is going to be back where it should be. We just got to make sure we absolutely make the most of it.
Yeah, I'll just add to that as well. I mean, I think the sort of the projected amount of money that the Women's World Cup is said to be bringing into the economy is like $500 million, and that's just the tournament revenue. That's just sponsorships and broadcasting and ticketing and merchandising. But I think the impact that this is going to have in terms of, I guess, if you can measure it in an economic sense, is that it's going to create an entire new generation of fans, and those fans are going to become participants in the game for life. They're going to go out and buy memberships at A-League and W-League clubs. They're going to buy boots. They're going to register for their local clubs. They're going to actually be part of a much longer and much bigger sort of economic landscape for football. And that's sort of been the big problem that we've been facing, I think, over the last couple of years, is that we look at football through quite an economic lens, because money, makes the world go round. And so a lot of people tend to get caught up in that. But I think we need to think about the fact that it's culture that drives the economy. And so if we're able to change the culture of football, we're able to change the economics of football as well.
Yeah, and Sam, you'd be able to talk more to this, but I know that the FFA are now targeting a sort of 50-50 split between women's and men's participation in Australian football by 2027, and the big increase there is going to be women's football. And I think they've even targeted certain age groups where being over 35, so mums coming back to play football. But I think the other big one there is the 13 to 17-year-old female footballers who generally stop playing the game because they pick up a gym membership or whatever it might be, and are now going to continue playing. So I start looking at the potential for the future Matildas of this game, that only Australian football in terms of their performances are going to increase. I don't think it's ironic, Garby, that we won the match in 2005 against Uruguay, and then 10 years later we won the Asian Cup, because the people who were watching as a 12-year-old, for example, in 2005 when we qualified for a World Cup, at 2022, like the Jackson Irvines of this world, I think, who was in the crowd that night at Homebush, and all of a sudden he's playing for Australia. Well, imagine the 12-year-olds who are going to be watching the World Cup in 2023, who 10 years later are going to be representing the country. So it's just going to do enormous things too for that sort of lost age group of Australian female footballers too, and increase the participation rates. And again, it goes back to what Vince's saying. So we've got 1.9 million people participating in football at the moment, and they're looking at making that 50-50. Well, it's only going to increase. That 1.9 million people isn't just going to all of a sudden reduce and become more female players. It's probably going to end up being 2.5 million people playing Australian football, and a lot of that is going to be, the increase is going to be women's players.
Well said. It inspires a new generation. And the last episode on this podcast is Matt Shervington, who talks about going to watch Sydney being awarded the Olympics in 2000 as a 14, 15-year-old, and how that inspires him to take up athletics full-time at 16. 4 years later, he's running in his own Olympics. I mean, that's the tangible impact it has, and it will do on a Women's World Cup as well.
I think Sam Kerr over the weekend as well, or maybe even before the bid was announced, was saying that she was inspired by Kathy Freeman in the Sydney 2000 Olympics, which is insane. So that's her moment. My moment, the reason why I'm doing what I'm doing is because of what the Socceroos did against Uruguay in 2005, really. So just imagine imagine if we won the thing in 2023, what that would do for so many people engaging with the game, male and female, boys and girls, and not necessarily just players either. People who, like me, want to get involved in the media, or, people want to coach, people want to do various other things. You need big events to hook people in to your sport. We're blessed to have so many at an international level, and we've got a massive one coming up right here in Australia and New Zealand, which is, still can't believe it, to be honest.
It's fantastic, and the FFA deserve enormous credit for it. They've had a tricky start, the new administration and board, amid many challenges, but this is a huge breakthrough for James Johnson and his team, and credit goes to them for executing what was a pretty slick bid and then ultimately delivering it. That is no doubt a relieving feeling and can hopefully set the platform for better things to come. But in terms of trying to win it, in terms of executing well come 2023, there are some on-field aspects to the story that will probably start to come out now that the wash-up of winning the bid has done. And those are the stories that a lot of football fans want to discuss as well. Firstly, the coach come 2023. It's currently Ante Milicic, who is set to take them to the Olympics, but he's got his MacArthur obligations as well come the next A-League season to deal with. So who, Samantha Lewis, do you think the coach may be come the 2023 Women's World Cup? Someone they have to appoint pretty soon, you would think, to get the ball rolling for what will be an enormous few years.
Yeah, it's a difficult one. I can't think of another women's national team manager in the world who is juggling their job with a head coach role at a club. I don't think that that's sustainable, and I don't think it's respectful to what a national team job really entails and what it means. But in saying that, the Matildas love Milicic. They love the professionalism that he's brought to the team, to the setup. They love all of his staff. They love everything about it. And Alana Kennedy spoke recently about the team wanting consistency, particularly off the back of all the drama that happened with Alan Stajic. So, I think Milicic is wanting to perhaps stay around until the Olympics, until the end of Tokyo. But I don't see how FFA can accept him wanting to do both. He's going to have to choose one or the other. And ideally, he would make that decision within the next 6 months so that we actually know what's going to happen and they can start searching for someone else. And with a Women's World Cup, a home Women's World Cup on the horizon, this national team job is going to be one of the most attractive and almost lucrative for any head coach in the world. So really we have the pick of the bunch. There are so many fantastic candidates out there who would adore the opportunity, not just to come and coach a team who's going to be hosting its own World Cup, but to coach this team, this Matildas team. We have one of the best players in the world in Sam Kerr. We have one of the best upcoming players in the world in Ellie Carpenter. We have this fantastic golden generation of players who any coach would be thrilled to work with. So, we're in the perfect position. We can sort of go out to town and see what bites.
I guess the other thing there, Garby, is, obviously Ante Milicic is under a contract to coach at Macarthur, but he's obviously going to have a big decision to make because, as Sam just said, such an attractive proposition for him to be able to coach his national team at a World Cup. But if he honours his contract at Macarthur, Sam, where do you think he would go? Where do you think they would go in terms of a coach? What do you think they'd do? Would Joe Montemuro? Would they like to have a female in charge at the World Cup? What do you think the FFA's thinking would be there if Ante does stay with Macarthur?
I don't think that they are going to. They're not going to recruit a female head coach just because she's female. They're going to be wanting to recruit a coach who is qualified, who has an obvious successful track record. We've got, it just so happens that a lot of those people happen to be women as well, which is great. You've got someone like Jill Ellis, who has won back-to-back World Cups with the US women's national team, who's floating around. She might be snapped up by England. But we also have someone like Joe Montemuro, who knows the Australian landscape, who knows the players, and who has success at Arsenal. So but also we've got former head coaches of Japan's women's national team floating around. We have there are so many options. But I think what FFA will probably want to do is bring in someone who is reliable, someone who has experience, who knows what they're doing, obviously, and preferably not somebody who has just been parachuted in from the men's game. I think that we're at a point now where we need to be recruiting people who understand women's football, who understand the sort of the broader landscape. It's not to say that coaches who come up through the men's ranks can't do it, because football is football, but I think in terms of the respect and the understanding that comes from coming through women's systems, I think that lends itself more particularly to a role like this. So, yeah, there are so many candidates out there who are absolutely, chomping at the bit to be able to get an opportunity like this. So, yeah, I think FFA, if they're smart about it, will be in a really good position to pick whoever we want.
This absolutely won't happen, Sam. This is total fantasy. Because he's quite busy. But the only Aussie coach I can think who would not correspond with everything you've just said, Ange Postecoglou. Just dream about it for a second. Imagine Ange coaching the Matildas at a 2023 World Cup on home soil. Just give us the trophy now, I reckon.
Bring him home, FFA. Come on.
It would be wonderful. Vince, what do you think will happen, though, with Ante in that situation, and who do you think they'd be angling for?
Look, I think the obvious candidate is Joe Montemuro. I think it's quite clear that I think over the weekend, actually, Macarthur FC put out a video of Ante talking about players he'd signed for the next season and the season being locked in for December. So it'd be nice to hear from him at some point in the near future as well about what a difficult situation he's in and just confirming once and for all what we think we know is that he won't be coaching the Matildas going forward. But Joe Montemuro has definitely put his name out there. He'd love to do it, especially if we're on home soil. He's coaching a massive club. He knows the women's game like the back of his hand. He's also you could put him in charge of an A-League team or anything like that as well. Like, he's one of those coaches who could do anything, really. He's that good. Players love him. Seems to be the obvious choice. And to be honest, I would definitely prefer an Australian coach rather than a foreign coach. Not necessarily just because an Australian coach would know our players better. Our players are internationally known. There's no dramas about that. I guess it's more about, just wanting an Aussie to be in that chair, especially for a home World Cup, and just backing our people and believing in our people to get us over the line. I think Joe Montemurro, if you were opening up a market on who the next Matildas coach would be, you'd be paying about $1.30, I dare say. But it'd be interesting to know who else throws their hat in the ring, that's for sure. Ange is totally fantasy football, but you have to start thinking about, okay, who are our best coaches in football, and who are our best coaches who have experience with the women's game, and maybe who are the best international coaches who have existing relationships with our Australian players, maybe. These are the sort of things I think FFA should be thinking about in the near future.
Yeah, I agree with you wholeheartedly. It's got to be an Aussie coach, considering it's a home World Cup, and Joe Montemurro. And if you don't have a candidate, then okay, you have to think globally. But if you've got someone as obvious as Joe Montemurro, who's at a top club in Arsenal, doing very good things early on, and has committed himself to the women's game and understands it so well, it just seems like he's the obvious candidate, and then you work back from there. But the pressure on the team will be interesting as well, and this is something that probably hasn't been discussed either. There is going to be enormous pressure, despite their quality, despite someone like Samantha Kerr, despite the fact that this team has been together for a while. I'll be honest, I covered the last Women's World Cup a year ago, almost to the day, and I didn't think they handled the pressure well. I think the pressure perhaps got to them a bit early, and they became very insular, and they started to put up the barriers, and I'm not sure they got the best out of themselves as a result. Dealing with that pressure, Samantha, flowing on from the last World Cup with what will be largely the same group of players, you would think, is going to be a massive challenge, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. But I think it's tough to use 2019 as a sort of a litmus test for what they're capable of, because that was a pretty unique situation. It was incredibly stressful for so many people, and especially the players. You know, when Alan Stajic was sacked, everything about it was wrong, and the sort of the furor that was generated around it, not just on social media but in mainstream media as well, it added so much extra pressure to a team that was already under quite a bit of pressure just in terms of the expectations of them performing at that World Cup. And even though they said sort of before June and during the tournament that they were just blocking it out, that they were just trying to, be together as a team, focus on the job, a number of players came out in the months afterwards and said, actually, all of that drama really affected us. It affected us psychologically, and it was really difficult for them to be able to enjoy themselves and to perform the way that they know that they can on a stage like that, particularly someone like Sam Kerr. Like, Sam Kerr said that she didn't perform as well as she knows she could have because she was so stressed based on all of that drama that was happening externally. So I don't think that that's a good example to use when we talk about what this team is capable of dealing with in terms of pressure. And it's also I think it's sort of impossible to project and predict what they will be like in 2023, because it's going to be something that none of them have ever experienced before. Your home crowd at your back for the biggest tournament on earth. And a lot of these players will be at their peak, they'll be at their prime. And so there will be a natural set of expectations, I think, on them to be able to perform. So I don't know. I don't know whether they're going to meet those expectations or not, but I just hope that we don't have another situation like the one we did in 2019, and we actually are able to see them do what we know that they can.
Muzz, you were at that World Cup as well. I mean, the pressure was huge in terms of their ability to perform to their best in 3 years' time. Do you think they'll have enough support around them from the FFA and hopefully from the new coach to execute and deal with all of that? Because it brings with it a lot of hype, which can help drive the team on, but then there's also the mental barrier of trying to match those expectations, which is very difficult.
Yeah, look, I mean, 3 years is a long time, and I was only looking today that I think Sam Kerr's gone back to the UK after some time in Perth to get back into playing some football for Chelsea. And in August, we've got the quarterfinals of the European UEFA Women's Champions League with Caitlin Ford's Arsenal taking on PSG. You've got Ellie Carpenter probably lining up for Lyon against Bayern Munich. So you're talking that in the next 3 years, you're going to have the likes of Kerr, Ford, Ellie Carpenter, Gilnick, people playing at the really highest level of the game for 3 years to get a lot of experience before we head into this World Cup. Obviously, as you said, there's now going to be not pressure on the FFA. There's just going to be an expectation that the FFA is going to be organising a lot of games for the Matildas to play in. No doubt we'll probably see a couple of tournaments on home soil featuring some of the best teams in the world. And there'll be a lot of interest for a lot of the best teams in the world to come to Australia to play some games to get ready and get used to the conditions. We'll probably also see a big foreign influx in the W League of players wanting to get down under and experience the condition leading into a World Cup. So all of those things are an enormous benefit for the team. The players are going to be playing at the highest level of the game in Europe. The W League is going to increase as well. So 2023, as I said, is still 3 years away. And I think that's a lot of time for not only those players to get more experience, but also for all of the team to get used to what Ante Milicic, if he's going to be the coach going forward, expects from them.
It's a great talking point, and these are the things we enjoy talking about. The on-field aspects as well. It's exciting. Can the team improve defensively from the 2019 World Cup where they were found out a bit? And can they make sure that they perform more consistently in an attacking sense where they showed glimpses of being as good as any other team, just didn't do it as often as they would have liked? And all those things are so exciting to talk about, and I guess helps take away from some of the issues in the men's game, which are probably going to be big talking points for the next 18 months and maybe more. And that comes in light of the new TV deal as we transition to the men's side of it. Vince, you've covered this really closely. I guess it's the only move the FFA could make, which was re-signing with Fox to buy themselves some time and still have a pretty good deal financially as well to underpin the game in that sense. But it does open things up in 18 months to 2 years for a whole new world for Australian football, which is on one hand exciting and on one hand pretty scary as well if things don't quite go to plan. Where do you think the game is right now in terms of the A-League and the game as a whole as a result of the new broadcast deal that was signed?
We are on track to be the first canary down the coal mine, really, for Australian sport for this big transition that's going to happen over the next few years. We've got, obviously, the rest of this season and next with Fox, but we won't have to wait too long to get a glimpse of what that's going to look like with the FFA Cup not signing up with Fox for next year. I'm actually quite excited to think about what the coverage of that is going to look like, how FFA are going to do it, where they're going to try and cut the costs, what sort of innovations they could bring in to make that an exciting broadcast experience. And also, I guess, how they monetize it, because that is another big question. You've heard a lot of former Socceroos and other types in the last few months come out and say FFA should say thanks, but no thanks to Fox and go their own way. And while there's certainly merit in doing something like that, you do need time and investment behind it to make it feasible. You're right, Garby. They've bought some of that now with this deal. So look, I'm honestly more excited than scared about where it's going to head because, like I said, it's a trend that all other sports are going to go down. In the short term, A-League is definitely going to sound and feel a bit different on Fox with the unfortunate news over the weekend that Simon Hill isn't going to be continuing with Fox going forward. It's classic Australian football for me. It's almost like we've done a deal with the devil. Yes, you get the Women's World Cup, but you lose one of your greatest advocates and voices in the process. It's really sad, but I'm pretty confident. I'm really, really hopeful actually that Simon is going to stick around with the game going forward in some capacities. Too an important voice to lose, but it just goes to show, I guess, the difficult circumstances on Fox's end too. They've been looking to cut costs and have found fit to do so with Simon. So it's very unstable ground we're on, but I like the rhetoric coming out of James Johnson and FFA recently about just backing the game, get our product right, and the rest will follow. And there's, I guess, a little bit of that you could say is surrounding the World Cup bit as well. We've backed ourselves there, we've got it, and it's great. Things look a whole lot more rosy now than they did a week ago, and let's just hope that it's a similar sort of situation with the A-League.
Murray, for 15 years, you were at the forefront of A-League television production. You had a great insight into all of these deals and how it came about. And then, as we've seen over the last couple of years, the deteriorating relationship between Fox Sports and the game as well. Where do you think this broadcast deal positions us, and where does it go next if Fox, as many people expect, do walk away at the end of this mini broadcast contract, if you like?
Yeah, look, I think the deal that was signed last week is probably good for both sides. I mean, if you're reading the tea leaves, Fox Sports has fallen out of love with football, and that's fair enough too, because obviously they're struggling, and the A-League is struggling, and if they rank their sports and look at which ones that they need to cut, then unfortunately it's going to be football because it wasn't pulling in the numbers for them. And that shouldn't be a criticism of Fox. I mean, obviously, Garby, you and I are slightly biased, but Fox Sports has done an incredible job over 15 years helping lift the profile of the game, and we can probably all four of us thank Fox Sports a little bit for the fact that we've got jobs in football, simply for the fact that they helped raise the profile and made it possible for people to have more media jobs, etc., and they put money into production so that people like you, Garby, could be on the sideline of Premier League games covering, Leicester winning Premier League titles, etc., etc. So, I mean, again, I'm slightly biased in that way that they've put over $1 billion into the game and they should be very much thanked for it. But as Vince said, they've clearly fallen out of love with the game and they're now looking for a way out. And I think that James Johnson's done an incredibly good job in getting another year out of Fox Sports to bide himself some time to be able to come up with what is next. So that they can really do the planning. I'm hearing all sorts of stories about the fact that board members are going to be flying around the world to talk to Netflix and Amazon and Apple TV to see whether there's any interest there. So they're clearly already planning for what the future may look like. And as Vince said, it's something that all sports are going to have to face in the near future.
I should mention as well, while it seems like an absolute guarantee that Fox might walk away from football at the end of this contract, I'm hearing it's not so ironclad that they may stick around if we get our act together for the next 12 months. And I've also heard that Fox have been quite impressed with James Johnson and his handling of a very delicate situation with those negotiations, and also the respect he's shown Fox and I guess his plans for the sport going forward. So while the relationship is definitely going to look different at the end of this contract, it may well be that we take on the production of the games and then sell them back to Fox or KO or something like that, or maybe Fox will produce 1 or 2 games a week or something like that, or maybe they'll be out completely. We don't know, but I guess that's what this next 12 months will decide is whether they're in or out and what degree they might be in.
I think it's going to be vital for all sports going forward to take over their own production. We've obviously seen it right throughout the world because unfortunately as a sport, you're therefore reliant on how important your broadcaster, your host broadcaster takes the sport. So if Fox are trying to save money, for example, and you're hearing stories that they might be reducing the number of cameras that they point at the games on the weekend, then that's not good for the sport. But if the production is taken back by the FFA and by the governing body, then they can control the editorial, they can control the look and feel, and they can also future-proof it for the next broadcast deal that they might be looking to make too. So I think that's something that all sports are going to have to negotiate.
I do have a question about this, because we're talking about FFA bringing production in-house, but how is it going to be affected by the A-League becoming independent?
From what I gather, I think it's going to be a bit of a joint effort, to be honest. While the A-League is definitely going to split away from FFA, as the plan was. I think there's, and again, you might attribute some of this to James Johnson's ability to negotiate and talk and the level of the football diplomat he is. I think in dialogue with the coaches, the club see that there are synergies, especially post-COVID, between FFA and A-League that should exist going forward. So maybe 12 months ago we were looking at an absolutely clean break. I think there's going to be elements of shared services and whatnot because of the pandemic and all the financial implications of it going forward.
Can I just quickly say there too, Garby, that this whole idea that the FFA just takes over the production of games, everyone seems to think that you just click a finger and make that sort of thing happen. I mean, Fox would spend, at their peak over $15 million on production every year. So the FFA have to find $15 million to produce their own games and then have to somehow work how they get that sort of money back, plus all the money that they used to make out of TV rights. It's not as easy as everyone seems to think it is. It's actually a really, really big process, and it's obviously not something that they can just put their fingers and make happen, but at least they now have over a year to look at whether that is a potential option.
I think there's been reports over the last 3-4 months as well about private equity potentially being involved in the A-League going forward, and I think this is one of the things that they would be looking for investment for, is if we have to go down this path, the money's got to come from somewhere. It's probably going to come from an outside company putting their money into the game, and that's not necessarily a good thing either. It means that there's people investing in the game with the expectation of taking that money back out at some stage and even getting a return on it. So that sort of adds to the pressure of everything about us getting it right as a game.
And people don't realise as well that while there's also trepidation over the cost that will come in and getting that money back, $50-odd million a year is a lot of money. And yes, the Socceroos and Matildas were part of that deal, and they were probably providing a return certainly more often than not on their games. A-League games, certainly in the last 3 to 4 years, have not been. And that money goes to the clubs, and then that money goes to the players, and it's a complete flow-on effect. And yes, there is an exciting aspect amid all of this, which is producing things yourself and perhaps partnering up with someone who is invigorated to be a part of football. But ultimately, money is the most important thing when it comes to supporting an entire competition, and getting that money, that same level, when you look at the figures in recent times, is going to be incredibly difficult. And the game may have to go 2 steps back for a while in order to go 3 steps forward. But those 2 steps back will be a very difficult period, and we'll go through some troubling times if things don't lift dramatically out of nowhere in the next 12 months. And that is something people have to be aware of, just how scary I think it could be when you consider the financial black hole that the game could drop into if, in fact, the Fox Sports company does walk away from football. The other interesting, positive, potentially negative aspect of the new deal is the winter trial, and that is just an enormous development for the game, potentially. Moving to a winter period, which makes complete sense for a year considering the Qatar World Cup, but going forward, whether it will work or not is also something that will be a big talking point for the next 12 months or so. Sam, we'll go to you first on this. What did you make of it when you heard about the news, and what do you think it will mean for the game of football as a whole? Will it work or will it not?
I don't really think the question is as black and white as that, to be honest. But, I mean, there are pros and cons, right? There are pros and cons to moving the calendar to winter. I think the most encouraging thing about it is that it finally seems like people are listening to things that the community have been asking for a long time. It seems like people within FFA are finally starting to realise that actually the people who watch and consume and participate in football and who have opinions about calendars and about all these kinds of things do have something valuable to add, and maybe we should listen to them. So I think that, I mean, for the men's game, certainly moving to a winter calendar ticks a lot of boxes. It ticks a lot of boxes in terms of aligning the pyramid, in terms of incorporating a national second division, promotion and relegation. It certainly makes the product a lot better to watch because players aren't running around in 35, 40 degree heat on a Sunday afternoon. And it also aligns us with Asia, and I think that that's really important and perhaps even an under-discussed aspect of this whole thing, because Asia, particularly I think the women's game is sort of a different conversation with this, but for the men's, particularly when it comes to things like competitions and transfer windows, I think aligning with Asia is where we need to be. Like, sort of more generally, I think that this is, if we want to see what it's going to be like, this is the opportunity to do it. Not just because of Qatar, and all the sort of international windows in and around that, but also because of COVID. Like, we're in a really flexible period of time at the moment off the back of everything that's happened. And so let's just give it a crack and see what happens. And if it doesn't work, then that's fine. We can just go back to what we were doing before. But if it does, that's great, because it means the game is going to get better.
You talked about pros and cons there. And I mean, you mentioned one of them being better football standard, of course, due to the weather. But I guess, as you said, there are pros and cons, because the con might be that the football is affected by the standard of the pitches that they're forced to play on. And ground availability is obviously one thing that's been talked about that's going to be tricky for a number of A-League clubs, particularly the likes of, Victory and City, who are going to be competing for AAMI Park alongside the Melbourne Rebels and the Melbourne Storm, or, the Brisbane Roar, who are obviously going to be competing for Suncorp with the Queensland Reds or whoever it might be. So there are pros and cons, but the one thing that people don't sort of take into consideration with the A-League and A-League ratings is the fact that the A-League competes with the sun, sand and surf over summer. Like, say, for example, you're a Mariners fan and your team's playing at 5:30 on a Saturday afternoon, but you're lying on the beach at Womble at 4:30 and you think to yourself, do I really want to go? You're not going to have that problem, obviously, in winter, because a lot of more people are going to be sitting in front of their TVs at 7 p.m. on a Saturday night in winter because there's nothing else to do. It's dark It's cold. You don't want to go out, so you put a rug on your lap and you sit and you turn the TV on. And if there's A-League on there, it's probably going to benefit from that. So, I mean, again, we talked about the W League before, so all of a sudden those guys, they aren't going to be forced to play at 2 o'clock in the afternoon on a Sunday where it's 40 degrees in winter. They can probably pick and choose far better times. And the other factor to take into consideration is that as of next season, we're going to have 6 A-League games every round, so you've got to find 6 TV times. Now, that's very hard to do in summer because you don't really want games starting till after 4 o'clock. But in winter, you can have a game at 3, 5 and 7 on a Saturday potentially too, where the conditions are still going to be good, or maybe playing a game in Perth at 7 their time, which will be 10 Eastern time too. So it's going to be a lot easier to coordinate match times and give everyone a decent go in winter when you're not competing against the temperatures and the weather. Just on
facilities quickly, Muzz, and you're absolutely right about the pitch quality issues there, but all our problems as a game are all interlinked, and this is where I'd like to see the next 3 years taken advantage of here. Most of our stadiums are ready to go for the Women's World Cup, but you'd like to think there might be a couple of chances where, say, in a Brisbane, we could get an upgrade to Perry Park so that it's a really good training venue that subsequently might only need a couple of $1 million of upgrades then to bring it up to A-League standard, or somewhere in Melbourne. I know that there's talk about a home of the Matildas at some stage at some location in Melbourne, but why can't we whack a cheap little grandstand on that and play some A-League and W games there too? All of our problems, if you were to draw a map on a corkboard about where all our problems are and how they connect, that's exactly right, Sam. It would be like that meme of that crazy guy who is trying to basically connect everything to everything, because it's all connected in Australian football, and that's what makes the job of James Johnson so complicated and so important.
Just on that, Vince, I mean, you're obviously across Queensland football, but I was actually thinking to myself, I mean, we mentioned that the Brisbane Roar are going to struggle trying to get onto Suncorp when you're competing against the Broncos and the Queensland Reds, but that might actually be a good thing, because they might now have the position whether they could go to the government, okay, Suncorp can't hold us all, so how about some money to upgrade Redcliffe or Perry Park? I mean, this might actually, the move to winter might work in the favour of clubs trying to get money out of the government to try and upgrade regional facilities.
Yeah, so this winter trial is going to be fascinating. If I get asked a question more than any other when it comes to Australian football, it's how does Australian football overcome its issues and go to the next level? And the broadest answer you can give is to galvanise the game and to galvanise the millions of people who are connected to the game. And if you are a parent who takes their kids to a junior game in the morning, if you're someone who plays amateur football on the weekend, if you're someone who wakes up at 4 a.m. to watch their Premier League team or their City A team or La Liga team, if you're someone who doesn't miss a minute of a World Cup game, then you are connected to football. And there's got to be a way to get those people to go to A-League and W League games more often, and crucially watch A-League and W League games more to support the professional game in this country. And moving to winter and aligning with the grassroots game and NPL clubs, and hopefully leading to a second division one day and promotion relegation and bringing the whole football community closer together is a great way to do that. That's been an issue, though, for 50 years, and people long before us have had these exact same discussions without the ultimate success. That doesn't mean that you stop trying, but it also means that it is a big issue that is very difficult to solve. But this makes a lot of sense to give it a trial considering the Qatar World Cup calendar and then see if there's some progression there to grow it further down the line. But the negatives are there as well. We've discussed it, ground availability and pitch quality due to football not having its own stadiums and therefore having to share with rugby league and rugby union teams, which will be very difficult, along with getting crowds to go during the winter time when it's 7 degrees and pouring with rain. That's a problem too. And then, yes, football needs to look after itself and not worry about competing with other codes. But at the same time, going head-to-head with the AFL and NRL for TV viewing numbers and for website and newspaper space is going to be very, very difficult indeed, Murray Shaw. So balancing all that up, it's going to be a very difficult proposition for the A-League to make that call in the W League moving forward long term.
Yep, look, I agree with a lot of that, Garby. And as a father, I like the prospect that I can take my son to play his game in the morning and then being able to take him and his mates to an A-League game in the afternoon. That all makes sense, and I know that's a big factor for the winter move. If I put my TV hat on for a second too, Garby, is that the A-League used to start in October. Now, October is actually a great month in the sporting calendar that the A-League at one stage, certainly when it was at its peak in around about 2015, really owned, because the rugby league and the AFL have all finished. There's no horse racing, there's no tennis, and there's no cricket. So October is actually a month where you can actually grab people's attention, and people can focus on the A-League. And if you look back through television ratings, the highest rating A-League games ever on Fox Sports have all basically pretty much occurred, if it wasn't a grand final, early in the season in October. And that's why that the FFA used to always play their big blockbusters and used to throw all their advertising money around October and getting off to a good start. But October now is almost going to be the end of the season leading into the finals if you start in winter. So that does make it tricky. And then if you start also to look at, people have brought up the fact that it's probably going to benefit teams in the Asian Champions League, and it will, of course, because it won't be such a big break between qualifying for the Asian Champions League and then playing as it is now, because you'll qualify for the Asian Champions League in November, December, and then be playing in February. But we used to also have an advantage in the Asian Champions League that we used to play against teams who were pretty much only coming off a pre-season and hadn't even started their league. So there is pros and cons for everything. There's probably pros and cons for the FFA Cup. How does that look now if it's a winter competition too? Because again, the NPL teams used to have a little bit of an advantage at one stage because they were playing towards the end of the season when the A-League clubs hadn't actually kicked off, and you might be able to catch them a little bit cold. That definitely won't happen if all the competitions are aligned, and maybe that gap between the A-League and the NPL might actually widen because everyone's on pretty much the same footing. So there are pros and cons for everything, but if you look at it, it's, why not have a go at it? Let's have a look at it. Let's throw everything out on the table and let's have a look at every possibility. If playing football in winter is going to work, and then let's do it. If we're only worried about the fact that it's going to be media coverage up against the AFL and the NRL, then yes, so be it. We know that that's going to happen, but let's get on with it and let's give it a go, and I think why not?
Vince, you've been following this very closely, have reported on it extensively. Your thoughts on the positives and negatives and whether you think this will work long term, even though it was a smart decision to do it for a trial period?
You've all said them, really, but it's about backing ourselves as a game. It's a huge risk, no doubt about it, but there's also huge benefits as well. I personally, look, winter is a crowded sporting market, but I can speak as a Port Adelaide fan and my habits of watching AFL. I don't watch every other game in the competition. I only watch the games, first of all, that I'm paid to cover for the Swans and the Giants, and also Port Adelaide. When that's on, but I'm not watching every game every week. So if I'm an AFL/A-League fan, like there are a lot of them in Melbourne and Adelaide and Perth as well, as we know, if the games are not necessarily on head-to-head with that person's team, then they might very well be open to watching another code of football. I think that's a little bit overplayed for mine. The dramas are going to be media space. That's a big problem, but, let's be real, we're not getting much of that as it is. And there's the benefits are potentially huge in terms of what it could do for football. If our product is better, then I back the number of football fans in Australia to actually respond to that. And there's all sorts of benefits for not just the A-League, but like you said, Asian Champions League, FFA Cup, potential for other competitions throughout the year, who knows. In fact, one of the things that I think a move to winter will open up for an international perspective is maybe Australia's participation in the Suzuki Cup at the end of the year, which is, I think definitely on the radar of FFA and something that a lot of Socceroos fans would be interested to see and certainly make Graham Arnold happy in terms of the number of games that our professionals need to play. And I think that's the other advantage, is that we can't just continue on shoehorning ourselves into what we think is free air, because at some point, if we're going to mature as a football nation, our players need to be playing 30-plus games a year. We need to have a system where we're actually developing players so that we can sell them and get the money back and reinvest it in the game. And that's just not happening with the way things are at the moment. So if we play longer throughout the year, you could call it winter, but we'd be playing a lot more than just winter football. That's for sure. It's a risk, like I said, but a lot of advantages, and I think it could work out.
Yeah, speaking to media and broadcast space, like that seems to be sort of one of the big problems when the community talks about a shift to winter. But like, as you say, Vince, we're not really being given that much anyway. But the thing for me is, like, this is why it's so important to back ourselves. It's because if we can get the product right, the media space and the broadcast space will follow. The media flocks to whatever is popular, whatever is rating. And so if we're able to actually unite the game and make it the kind of thing that people want to attend and want to watch, the money and the publicity is going to follow.
Yeah, there's the bigger issue for me is ground availability. I just don't see how they're going to get around that problem without some serious issues and some serious barriers put in their place. Yes, go to boutique venues. That will be the solution for many. But there's still a lot of rugby league teams that play on those venues, first and foremost. They don't exist and just sit there waiting for a football team to come in. They're there because other teams are already using them in the winter. So you're still going to have to juggle that. Another issue that I don't think has been mentioned in regards to boutique venues, as much as I'm all for them, don't get me wrong, they are great on TV and great for fans. And the more and more we use them in Australian football, the better we will be. But there are certain clubs like Melbourne Victory, like Sydney FC, like the Wanderers when they're up and going, and a few others, that do need quality corporate facilities. That brings a lot of money through to those clubs. We need to, as much as it's not as important as getting all the fans through and not as important, of course, as the aesthetics on TV, the top end of town and the money that comes through from that is still crucial for a lot of clubs. A team like the Melbourne Victory, their corporate support is enormous. And if they don't have those facilities in place, the same with the Sydney FC, for example, it does hurt them. And we want the top end of town contributing to the game as much as we want fans coming through as well, because that's important for the finances. So that's an element, Muzz, as well, that I don't think has been considered, going to boutique venues during the winter and not having those facilities in place for that sort of support as well.
Yeah, let's break that down, Garby. I mean, if you look at the ground availability issues, the grounds that don't have any problems, Hindmarsh, obviously, ME Bank in Perth. I'm hearing from that there might be a push to get Western United's brand new stadium up quicker than expected because it's going to create some jobs that might help economically in the area. So we might not have to wait as long for Western United playing out of their own stadium. Obviously, no problems either for at Central Coast Stadium. It's tricky for Sydney FC if they're juggling between Cogra and the Sydney Football Stadium because of other tenants. It's obviously going to be tricky at McDonald Jones for Newcastle, tricky in Wellington, tricky at Bankwest Stadium, and potentially tricky too for Macarthur out of Campbelltown, but not impossible because, for example, for Macarthur at Campbelltown, you've got the West Tigers playing there every now and then, not every second week. But it's obviously very difficult for the clubs we mentioned before, so Victory and City at Amy Park, and also for the Brisbane Roar at Suncorp, which we touched on before. But if you look at Melbourne Victory, for example, I mean, surely they're the main tenant at Amy. Surely Amy goes out of its way to look after Victory ahead of the Rebels and the Storm. So as much as we talk about ground availability, it's not an impossibility that these clubs could be playing out of these grounds. What is an issue, of course, is what the standard of those grounds are going to be like, because we know that rugby union generally rips up a ground and rugby league obviously doesn't help. So these grounds aren't going to be as pristine as they are during summer. But in terms of sharing the venues, it's not an impossibility.
You've just hit on something there, Muzz, for sure. And it sort of speaks to our inferiority complex as a game as well. I mean, why are we talking about Victory and City needing to find other alternative options in Melbourne? And why aren't we talking about the Melbourne Rebels needing to find alternative
100%,
options?
100%.
They pull in much smaller crowds than us. They are the ones who tear up the grounds. They're the ones who reside in a competition that we have absolutely no idea what it's going to look like right now. And I'm sure if I'm running Amy Park, I'm wanting Victory and City, if they're playing more games in a season, in fact, than the current number in the A-League, I want them playing out of my ground more than I want the Melbourne Rebels playing maybe, 8 or 10 games out of a Trans-Tasman Super Rugby season. That's definitely the case.
These discussions are things on all things being equal, as it stands right now, and how difficult it is. Of course, certain things can change. And, yeah, the Melbourne Rebels, that's a great point. Perhaps they should be moved. But you've still got the Storm playing every second week, and you've still got the rain coming after they've ripped up the ground. And it's going to be very, very difficult to navigate through all of that. But it's a smart move to do it in 2022. And if a lot of the NPL clubs start to get on board a bit more, some that have perhaps turned their head away from the A-League, well, that's going to be powerful for the game moving forward too. So it does make sense, but there are a myriad of problems that the game will have to navigate through long term if it comes to the switch being permanent.
I also just want to quickly talk about the W League, because there seems to be an assumption that the W League is going to go with the A-League. I think maybe there are a couple of media reports that misinterpreted the release from the FFA when they were talking about this movement of the calendar. The W League is a really different proposition in terms of a winter switch compared to the A-League, not just because it's a much smaller competition, it only runs for 4 months, but also because it needs to fit into the calendars of other leagues around the world, because it's not a fully professional competition yet. It can't sustain itself like that. So it needs to be thought about in a more strategic manner in terms of fitting in alongside a competition like the NWSL in the United States or some of the Nordic leagues in Europe. Because at the moment, our players aren't able to sustain a single career in a single league. They're still having to jump back and forth across leagues to make a living. So when we talk about the W League moving to winter, I still think that should be the longer term goal. The W League absolutely needs to be its own fully professional standalone league. It needs to be a development league. We need to be sure that the identity of the W League is to produce Matildas, and that we produce those Matildas to send them off to the big leagues in order to improve the national team. And then the sort of the flow and effect of that feeds back into grassroots. But ultimately, I think that if I am sort of projecting how FFA or the A-League is going to do this, I would assume that the A-League would be moving to winter first. The W League would probably stay in summer, and it would give a Fox Sports or another broadcaster year-round Australian football. So while the A-League plays from X to X and then has a couple months off, those months will be filled exclusively with W League. And that could actually be a really good thing for the women's game here.
I want to bring up a couple more points in regards to the upcoming A-League season. And in terms of one of them, it certainly does fixture into how the competition might go when the new season starts in December. That is MacArthur FC, who have been such an interesting new franchise without having kicked a ball. They've hired new staff and sacked new staff in that time. And over the weekend, Sam Krislovich, one of their directors and someone who's been crucial in setting the club up, has basically said that they've been targeted unfairly in an SBS interview due to their ethnicity, which I found to be a rather interesting comment when you consider all that's gone on at that club. Vince, what did you make of Sam's comments, and what do you make of the way MacArthur have gone about things in their early stages?
I have to say, I certainly cocked my eyebrow at that one. I don't know what ethnicity MacArthur are. One of their main owners is Croatian, but the other one's Italian. And I'm Italian. So if it's one of my reports that's been the issue, then I'm being racist against myself to a degree. I don't think that flies. Look, it's a little bit hard to make of what exactly is going on out there. Quite clearly, the two bids that had come together to form MacArthur FC, the Southwest Sydney one and the MacArthur one that was backed by the local council, clearly something's happened there where one half is sold out and the remaining half, which has bought up the rest of the shares, wanted their own people throughout the club, which is, I guess, their right to do. They probably could have handled it a little bit better. Certainly, since some of it has actually ended up in the courts, which is never a positive thing. I guess we'll find out more about that when that process plays through. I guess one of the things that I find okay with it is that Sam Krislovich, I think, over the next 12 months and beyond, is going to emerge as a real character in the A-League. He's not going to be afraid to say what he thinks. He's going to come out with things that might, to us, sound a little bit silly, but to him, that's his view, and it's great. And it's actually good to have people coming out there and saying things and not being worried about what the outcome is, because it adds texture to the league. It adds just a little bit of a point of difference, I guess, when you think about the A-League over the last 3-4 years. Everyone's been very cautious to not upset the apple cart. Well, now we've got a club who's coming in and they don't care. They're going to sack people if they don't want them at their club anymore, and they're going to accuse people of whatever they want to do. And look, you agree, you disagree, but let's roll with it. It could be a little bit of fun.
I really like what MacArthur have done on the whole since coming in. I emceed a couple of their community functions when they started, before they were actually launched with the brand. And I think the connection they've had with the locals there is really exciting, and they seem to be really progressing strongly. I think a couple of their functions, Muzz, we've sat next to each other at them. They've been really slick, apart from a couple of audio-visual issues at one of them. But the way that they've brought big people into the club and linked up with the community, I think has been fantastic. Yet they seem to be tripping themselves up in so many different areas, mainly with staff, without having kicked a ball in anger. So it seems as if it might be one of those clubs that's vibrant and connects with the community, but always has these little issues going on in the background that, as Vin says, probably adds a bit of narrative. That's interesting.
Sounds like any football club the world over, Garby. Things might be going well on the pitch and all of a sudden everyone's focusing on what's going on off the pitch. But let's face it, I think all four of us would like to see MacArthur do well because it means the A-League's going to do well, and that's got to be the focus for the next few years. And just on those, claims that they're a ethnic-based club, I remember exactly the same comments being thrown towards the Western Sydney Wanderers when they started up, simply because they had Tony Popovic and Ante Milicic as their two coaches when they started and signed Dino Crescent. I mean, that's always going to follow whatever club it might be. I mean, we're going to say the same thing about Western United because they've got Mark Rudin and Steve Horvath there. I mean, it's just it's food for the papers, I guess, Vince, but I don't think there's a lot of credit to it.
No, I would agree with that. And just quickly, Vince, a story that's just emerged on the morning of this recording, Robbie Fowler not returning to the Brisbane Roar. That's a big development.
Yeah, not hugely surprising, though, if you sort of read between the lines of what he was saying over the last few months and the seeming lack of urgency about getting him back to Brisbane for the rest of the A-League season. It certainly seems like Robbie wanted to stay in England for at least as long as it took Liverpool to win the title, that's for sure. And his name has been linked to a bunch of other jobs in the UK, not just, over the last 6 months or so, but actually like last week, I think he was linked to the job at Birmingham City. Those things don't come out of nowhere. I'm sure there's probably someone on Robbie's behalf sniffing out potential opportunities, and good luck to him, really. I mean, he wasn't comfortable with coming back apparently because of COVID and because his family would be remaining in England while he would be coming back over here. That's fine. If you're Brisbane Roar, you're seeing that. You're seeing a coach who's not completely committed to the cause. You go your separate ways, really. And one of the silver linings, I think, out of COVID is that I think next season and maybe even the season after that, it's going to be harder to bring in foreign players, foreign coaches, things like that. We've already seen Adelaide United have committed to having an Australian coach next time. Brisbane Roar here have committed to their next permanent coach being Australian. So we're actually seeing the clubs, for years we've been yelling at them basically to give Aussies a chance and that sort of thing. Well, now their hand is being forced, and who knows, we might unearth the next Ange Postecoglou or the next really exciting coaching talent or playing talent through this time when we've got to look at our own people and give them opportunities. So look, if Robbie didn't want to come back, then thanks for your service, Robbie, and I think the game will be okay without him.
I think it will. A shame in one sense, though, because he was actually starting to track pretty well in Brisbane, and the Roar were improving, and he was bringing a lot of attention to the A-League from abroad, especially from Liverpool, which has connection, of course, to so many powerful people in the game. But yes, if he decided it's not for him, well, then yes, we move on. And remember that time, as brief as it was, with as much fondness as we can.
Just wanted to congratulate you, Garby, because you've managed to bookend this entire podcast with chat on Liverpool. So well done to you. You've started with the little Liverpool at the beginning, and we've just finished with a little Liverpool at the end.
I thought that worked out brilliantly as well, and I already had a little segue in my mind, Muzz, to finish off on, but you've managed to do it for me. Always my producer to the very end, Murray Shaw. So
it was as smooth as a Fabinho shot.
It is still a wonderful time for us Reds fans, and we will make it as unbearable for the rest of you as we can for as long as possible, because the jokes for 30 years, of course, were given to us endlessly over that time. Thank you so much for your input, Samantha Lewis, Vince Regari and Murray Shaw on Greats with Garby. Really appreciate it. I know the football community out there and the sports fans out there will enjoy the insight as well. It's great to do different podcasts like this in addition to interviews with sporting greats. So thank you so much for your time and for your wonderful insight on these fascinating issues.
Thanks, Garby.
Garby. Thanks, fellas.
Are you a podcaster? Maybe you've got that big idea and you're looking for a network to join. The multi-award-winning Ozcast Network can get your content to eyes and ears all over the world. Join now for the first month free, and you could be featuring this sound at the beginning of your podcast.
Ozcast.
Simply head to ozcastnetwork.com for details.